radio. I guess this is a general question. How do you anticipate winning the hearts, minds, and votes of New Hampshire voters? But it's not important to you since the last election when you really reported single digits.
Right, and some people say, well, why don't you make your message more mainstream? Well, my message is becoming more mainstream because there was one time when if you talked about the Federal Reserve, that wasn't mainstream. If you talked about bringing troops home and not fighting these senseless, undeclared wars, that was not mainstream. If you talked about a balanced budget, that was not mainstream. Today, the American people are demanding it, they're sick and tired of it, and they're frightened about it, and they want somebody to take a strong stand and say, yes, it's mainstream to start talking about sound money, and it certainly ought to be mainstream to be a stickler for the Constitution. I mean, we got into this mess by not obeying the Constitution, so why should we just decide to obey the Constitution, which would mean it is limited government? Government should be local. It should be our cities and state governments. It should be all the mandates and central economic planning in Washington, D.C. So the mainstream is now the message of limited government. So I think I'm in the right place at the right time for that message.
One more, the debt ceiling, big debate. I'm sure you're against raising it, but what would be the alternative? The administration said a financial catastrophe.
Well, it's a catastrophe if we keep doing what we're doing. I see that as the destruction of the dollar, and when that happens, that's the worst political event that you could have. So that alternative is horrible. But they'll try to intimidate us and build up fear and say the end of the world, just like they did in 2008, and said, well, if we won't bail out all the banks and all the big businesses, we'll have a depression. The depression would have been on Wall Street. Instead, they gave the depression to the people. People lost their jobs and lost their homes, and now are suffering from the inflation. So the alternative is so much easier, and that is just to live within our means, cut the spending. And we don't have to start with child health care. We start with what I just mentioned. We start with foreign welfare and militarism, the military-industrial complex. Why are we spending these hundreds of billions of dollars? Why do we pay for the defense of Germany? They get a free ride, and then they pump up their entitlement system. We do it in Japan. We do it in Korea. South Korea is a wealthy country, and we're intimidated by a country that can't even turn their lights on at night, North Korea, and we have to continue this process. No, there's a lot of places you cut. And the reason I won't vote for the debt increase is it'll force them to cut. But it'll probably pass, and this process is going to continue. And what I'm trying to do is head off a dollar crisis, which is a political crisis, and that will be a lot more serious than what we had in 2008.
Congressman Paul, given the scandal with Congressman Anthony Weiner, do you see it fit that he should resign?
Yeah. I don't see any reason for his benefits. I would think that he should be embarrassed by that. Or maybe that stepping aside would help him recover from his embarrassment.
All right, thank you.
Congressman, I understand you believe federal spending could be cut back by as much as 80%. Where beyond the military spending do you see room for that kind of cut?
Okay, the question the other day that you read about is, in my ideal society, how big would the government be? And under the Constitution, yes, I sincerely believe it would be, 80% of it is doing things we shouldn't be doing, and everything else should be done locally. That was not a suggestion that tomorrow and the next day and within a few years we're going to do that. I'm much more realistic than that. But the question is real. Where would you cut other than the military? And I never want to cut defense. There's a big difference between cutting defense and defending this country and cutting militarism. So where would we cut? Well, you could start with the Department of Education. I don't think the federal government should be taking care of education. I'd start with the Department of Energy. You don't need the Department of Energy. They've messed up the production of energy. I'd start with the Department of Agriculture. We don't need to subsidize big corporate farm. We don't need a Department of Commerce. There's so many places that we can cut back. I think the biggest department now is the Department of Homeland Security. I mean, why did we exist for maybe 200 years without a Department of Homeland Security? Now it's the biggest department ever, and all they do is undermine our liberties and prod us and poke us and take x-rays at airports. And they've never caught anybody. All these years. All they do. And why don't we defund the Patriot Act? All they do is undermine our liberties, and they're able to issue search warrant or search us and go into our homes and our records without a search warrant. And one of the tragedies there was that right after 9/11, they passed the Patriot Act. So if you voted against it, you were not patriotic. Just think of how many people would have not voted for it if it would have been called, this is the repeal of the Fourth Amendment Act. So there's so many places that we could cut. And I haven't yet mentioned that, well, we have to go to child health care. Even though in my perfect society, I would wean us all off the federal boondoggles. People, I just don't think the federal government's any good at it. And, Medicaid and Medicare are bankrupt. Social Security is bankrupt. And that's why we have to be prepared for the ultimate bankruptcy is runaway inflation.